This is Melissa. It is the 12th of July, 2026. I wanted to mention, for those of you who have followed the alternate world for a while, that Jon Rappoport passed away on the 8th of this month, and many of you will be familiar with his work, primarily on his site, No More Fake News. And Alan Watt read many of his articles over the years. He did a lot of good work, journalism on alternative health and many other things as well. And I'll post a couple of things about his passing. So I'm just sharing that with you. The Redux that I picked for today is from September the 5th, 2013. Alan Watt, Cutting Through the Matrix, live on RBN. And this is the poem that accompanies the talk. Dead loss if you don't know who's boss. The global dominance agenda seems insane, and the U.S. is set to take the blame. Yet internationalists who own the nations, extremely wealthy in money occupations, have used countries before, set on fire revolutions promising the heart's desire of freedom, equality, liberty, the con. They bind all with a financial thong of slavery, class, privileges, and debt. Privatize government departments, and yet, while stomping naive into the mud, they use military for the letting of blood. This huge agenda requires sacrifice, for war is peace, and other Orwellian lies. There were several things that caught my attention in the news, and so I thought it was time to take a trip to the Middle East, to talk about Israel, to talk about AIPAC. And this is the talk that I settled on. Just a couple highlights here. Alan said, so we're living through a script. He certainly said that many, many times through the years. It's a system that has been on the go for a long, long time. Alan repeated that. So we're living through a script. Alan repeated that. So we're living through a script. And even the social changes you're experiencing today are all planned, again, by the private foundations and implemented all through their front men that they have in government and outside of government. So we're living through their script. Most folk don't quite get that it's their script. It's a very good talk, and he's focused on AIPAC. So one of the reasons why I picked this is because I get a few things via my brother. Now, I don't see the world the way that he does, but then again, I don't see the world the way a lot of people do. And I like to listen to people, hear where they're coming from, see what they watch, listen to what they listen to, just to see, finger on the pulse, if you will. And he was watching Tucker Carlson talk to someone, I don't remember who, an ex-congressman or so forth. And it was talking about the move to integrate U.S. and Israeli militaries. Now, Tucker Carlson is authorized to say the things that he does and have the guests that he has. So I always take that into consideration, frankly, when I'm listening to anyone. And this was so outrageous, and I had just missed it. Evidently, this is a story because this is something that is in the Congress, the NDAA, that's the National Defense Authorization Act. And it's the 2027 version of that. So this has been several months at least being talked about behind the scenes, and for those who are very carefully following politics, which, as you know, I don't. But when I heard Tucker talking about this with his guest, I was stunned. I can still be surprised by things, even if I'm starting at the Alan Watt shortcut. We're living through a script. So here I'm looking it up on a site called Responsible Statecraft. Now, there is no such thing, in my opinion, as balanced, neutral news. I just want to mention here that the Quincy Institute, the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, from which this article is coming from, receives their funding from. Okay, before I continue on, I don't know if you can hear this, the fireworks here. I think someone got their wires crossed, and because last Saturday night was the 4th of July. I'm actually recording this on the 11th, in the evening, the late evening of the 11th, and the fireworks are going louder than they were last week. So if you can hear them, well, happy 4th of July. So the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft received their initial funding from George Soros' Open Society Foundations and Charles Koch Foundation, and other funding from Ford Foundation and Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and Schumann Center for Media and Democracy. The Institute distinguishes itself from other think tanks in Washington, D.C. by refusing to accept money from foreign governments. Well, whoop-de-doo. I can hardly think that they're neutral. But nonetheless, following in the example of Alan Watt, I take news where I can find it and from all sources. Congress quietly moves to integrate U.S. and Israeli militaries. In the first step towards shifting aid further into the shadows, the House's 2027 NDAA would all but fuse the two countries' armed forces together. At a time when the American public is expressing unprecedented levels of distrust in the Israeli government, Congress just proposed tying the U.S. to the Israeli military more than ever before. Buried in the House's version of the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, released on Tuesday, is Section 224. And this article, by the way, is dated May 29, 2026. As I say, this has been public knowledge for a couple of months now, or at least a month and a half. I'm only becoming aware of it. The provision would arguably do more to intertwine the U.S. military with the Israeli military than the more than $200 billion inflation-adjusted in military assistance Israel has received from the U.S. since its founding in 1948. Section 224 lays the groundwork for bilateral research and development, co-production of weapons, joint ventures, licensing agreements, and seemingly every manner of U.S.-Israeli military-industrial complex cooperation. The U.S. and Israel already work together heavily on missile defense, but this provision would greatly expand coordination to seemingly every area of defense tech, including AI, quantum, autonomous systems, directed energy, cyber, biotech, and many more. It also proposes network integration and data fusion. In other words, the U.S. military's data could soon be the Israeli military's data. Well, frankly, I think we're already there. Now, this is a lengthy article, and I am going to post it for you to read for yourself if you are interested. But before I stumbled on that, just having heard the Tucker interview, I went looking. I thought, this is crazy. I can't even believe what I'm hearing. And one of the very, very first articles that I found was from AIPAC. That's the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee. It is an American pro-Israel lobbying group, and Alan is going to talk about AIPAC in this talk, so I'll leave him to give you more details and more background on who and what AIPAC is. But back to my just disbelief that this was true, what I heard on Tucker. This is an AIPAC memo from June the 4th, 2026. United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. As the threats facing the United States and Israel grow in scale and sophistication, the two allies must innovate faster to maintain their military edge. Why does this initiative matter? And it goes on to outline that. But this was the part that caught my eye. Refuting myths about the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. So, myth number one, the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative, quote, merges, end quote, the U.S. and Israeli militaries. Fact. The United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative does not create joint command structures or transfer any decision-making power to Israel. It establishes a coordination mechanism for defense technology cooperation, formalizing and strengthening existing cooperation. So it's going to go on in true Snopes, fake news kind of way to give us the myths and then the fact. And all of the investigation that I have done says, yes, absolutely, that is what's going on. That is what this bill is proposing to do. Alan talks about the list, Wesley Clark, 7 countries. There's one thing that I want to say about timing. So when Wesley Clark said 7 countries, and this was a good, couple of decades ago, I don't remember the date now, and it didn't happen in those years. It has happened. It is happening. This is the same as when Alan talked about the merger of Mexico, Canada, and North America into a trading bloc to be coordinated with the EU and the Far Eastern Rim trading bloc. These things are happening with bilateral and multilateral agreements. They are ongoing, and the idea that there's not a formal announcement made, they just keep chugging along. So back to the Middle East, you see them taking these countries out or attempting to. And Syria comes up in this 2013 talk from Alan, and that's done. That's a done deal now. Totally orchestrated by the U.S. They basically put a terrorist in. They took out an elected president, Bashar al-Assad. They call it, as they always do, a rebel offensive. And then they installed Ahmed al-Sharaa. He's called politely a former rebel commander, but he was a high-ranking member of Al-Qaeda. So these things obviously there's Western intervention here. Now, the latest, I'm going to post a couple of articles on Turkey. Israel has a problem with Turkey, and it's thought by some people that that Turkey will be next. Now, it was not on that original list of 7 countries, but I think it suits purposes for what's happening in the Middle East, that Turkey may well be next, or may well be soon. So one of the things that Alan says that for me is a key thing here in this talk, after discussing AIPAC and Israel and the Middle East, he talked a bit about John Holdren. This is depopulation. He was, I think, President Obama's something like population czar. And Alan said, anyway, this is what they put out for you. And these are the guys who are supposedly running the countries. Remember, you don't have countries anymore. That's what Van Rompuy said, the guy who was appointed as the head of the EU Parliament. He says the nation state is obsolete. I read the article on the air at the time. Go into the archives section at cuttingthroughthematrix.com and read it for yourselves. See, people think, they always think, as I say, when you get pushed to go to wars and so on, that you're still a nation. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're run by a small clique, a minority of people, and the whole world is like that now with an internationalist agenda. It's been like that for 100 years, and so you don't have what you think is your own country with its own customs and so on. That's why they're always changing. You're progressive. You're going through the agenda, folks. I will link to that to save you, if you're interested, to save you the trouble of looking for that. This is from the Daily Mail, 2010. Nation states are dead. EU chief says the belief that countries can stand alone is a lie and an illusion. The age of the nation state is over, and the idea that countries can stand alone is an illusion and a lie, the EU president believes. In one of the most open proclamations of the goal of a European superstate, since the heyday of Jacques Delors, Herman Van Rompuy went on to denounce Euroscepticism as the greatest threat to peace. Tory backbenchers condemned the inflammatory comments in the speech made by Mr. Van Rompuy to mark the 21st anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I'll post the rest of that there if you're interested. There is a quote. Mike in Canada used this in a special edition of Real History that he created, and it's such a good one to remember. I've made a screenshot of it, and I just keep it up on my desktop and look at it from time to time. It's from September 3, 2009, and Alan said, "Hi folks, I am Alan Watt. We're cutting through the matrix. Just hoping that people out there really start to really get it. You've got to start thinking the worst. You've got to cross that line. People who are waking up come through different stages. Most of them never get close to the last line. The last line is where you're saying, well, I know all this, but they wouldn't really do that. People wouldn't do that. No one is so horribly cruel as to actually do that. If they can't cross over that line, they won't get the rest of the picture. Believe you me, it's like crossing over a mountain. Everything suddenly makes sense when you accept, yes, not only would they do that, they have been doing that to you. You'll see everything completely different. I stress on this because I'm talking about Israel and AIPAC, and so is Alan, and a lot of people get stuck there. And they need to identify an enemy. They need to identify the other. They, the dozens, possibly hundreds of shows where Alan Watts said, think for yourself, look at the man in the mirror, you must be your own champion. You must quit looking for the external and look at the at you. What do you want to do? Or as he said in the Cutting Through books, sucker, you're itty. It's up to you to decide. And I think that may be a hard and maybe even impossible to do if you haven't crossed over the mountain. Because crossing over the mountain is accepting things like you don't have a nation state. That's a myth, as Alan pointed out over and over and over, to get you to rah-rah or send off firecrackers on the 11th of July because, you love your country so much. If you can cross that mountain, and with it, yes, there comes some suffering and some heartache, because the illusion that peeling away the layers of the onion to see that you are looking at an illusion, there's tears with the peeling of that onion. But if you can do that, it opens up a whole new vista, and that vista is, what are you going to do? I received a message from someone on Substack, and on Substack, there's an opportunity for people to just send you a message out of the blue. You don't know who they are, and you can take a look and see what they have to say. So I received a message from someone that I don't know and I'd never heard from. I don't know anything about them. And they said, this is it. This is the entirety of their message. You know a lot, but do you have solutions? I wrote them back. I am not convinced I, quote, know a lot, but I do know myself. That was the starting point with Alan Watt and what I apply to myself. Man, woman, in the mirror. That allows me to find solutions for myself. But those would not be appropriate for anyone else. Those kind of, quote, solutions usually end up in group efforts that lose steam or are infiltrated and pointed in directions that derail the mission of the group. In the real history conversations I have over the years, I've talked to all sorts of people who are doing things or trying to live in ways that incorporate their values. For example, semi-off-grid, gardening, different kinds of activism. Today I received a walkabout video from someone showing me the organic farm where they live and work half the year. This life solution meets many of their needs, but I wouldn't advocate other people go do that. I work long hours without much relaxation or the kind of social interaction that others might need and crave. But I like to find many ways to encourage people to check out Alan Watt's work, the Cutting Through the Matrix website, etc., because his work helped me look at my life and choices in a way that nothing else I had encountered did. So again, how I live my life cannot be how others live theirs. One thing that Alan talked about was the idea of the so-called controlling elite as control freaks, cradle to grave telling us how we should live, how we must live to save the planet or whatever. Utopias and the greater good always offer solutions. Trouble is, everyone must take the offered solution or else. Know yourself and change yourself and your life in the ways that work for you. Despite the controlling control freaks, an individual committed to their own path can make a difference, throw a spanner in the works. And I leave you with that because as I have said before, when these kinds of stories like the merger of the U.S. and Israel military capabilities or, the split hairs any way you will, their research and development, hit the mainstream and the alternative. There's a lot of pointing over there to those people. Well, of course they're the culprit. Of course they're the problem. And if you stop there, you have not crossed over the mountain. All people are used. All people are used in this ancient agenda. I appreciate your support. There are lots of ways to support. There are free audios to download, thousands of them, at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You can write me a letter and send a donation to CTTM, Post Office Box 815, Keene, Keene, Texas 76059. And I'm always telling you to write me a letter or send me a postcard. And it's just so sad that last week I received no letters in the mail at all. So I'm not guilt-tripping you, really, not much. Thank you for listening. Take care.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on September the 5th, 2013. For newcomers, I advise you to make good use of the website cuttingthroughthematrix.com. There's lots of audios for free download. And I take you through the system that you're living through, you're born into. It's a complete system, actually very well worked out. And it should be too, because it's been on the go for an awful long time, well over 100 years in fact. And you'll find that the big private foundations, the big money boys, set themselves up a long time ago, at the height of the British Empire even, and they were based in London, the city of London, and they set up private organizations which would be a parallel government, the real government, in fact, the ones that controlled all the cash. And that's where the money lies. So they set up foundations, tax-free, tax-exempt foundations, to basically give themselves lots of cash to use for think tanks. And with these think tanks to advise with policies for every country across the world, and other social policies, including military and so on and so on. And they're still on the go today, these private organizations. Some of them sound very official, like the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which is a private organization. And its American counterpart, the CFR, that's a member of the same organization to take over the same kind of world empire for globalism. And they're incredibly powerful indeed. They also hire thousands of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. In fact, they found them and set them up. And they lobby governments for all the changes that you're hearing about today, constantly advocating these changes to suit the boys at the top. So help yourself to the website. Remember too that you can help me take along here by getting the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. That's all there is to I have for sale. And you can help me take along by donating too. And to do so, go into the website, as I say, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You can also get on the sites listed there. On that particular site, you'll see a whole bunch of sites. You'll find they all carry the audios for free download. They all carry transcripts in English for print up in many of the talks I've given over the years. And you can get transcripts in other languages if you go into alanwattsentinel.eu. Remember, from the US to Canada, you can still order by using personal checks or international postal money orders from the post office, or you can send cash or use PayPal. Across the world, Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal. Remember, straight donations are seriously welcome as we go through the planned inflation, which they call quantitative easing these days. So we're living through a script, and that's what folk don't understand, is a script. And remember, I've mentioned so many times in the past that Professor Carol Quigley, who was at one time the historian for the Council on Foreign Relations, this private group, of course, they push their own members into governments as well, and the high bureaucratic positions. He was a historian for them, and he said basically they've been behind all the wars in the last 100 years, and maybe even further back under different names. And basically we're going through a continuation today of the same system, war after war, all planned well in advance, and everything's lined up like ducks in a row, with the same propaganda being used pretty well to take down all the countries that are on the list to be taken down. And of course you've got to remember the PNAC group back in the 90s published that the countries they wanted to be taken out, and Obama simply continuing the same agenda in his particular reign, as they call it. So We're living through a script, and even the social changes you're experiencing today are all planned again by the private foundations and implemented through all the front men that they have in government and outside of government. So we're living through their script, and most folk don't quite get that as their script. Their plan too, to not just bring in a global government, but also to bring in an authorized, controlled society across the whole planet. That's a big undertaking that has to be finished this century, because this is what they call, in their own terms, in their own language, the century of change. And so they have to finish off all the countries that will not come under the global World Bank system, the Bank for International Settlements, the IMF, and go along with the World Trade Organization. They all have to be plundered, smashed to smithereens if necessary, and brought into the fold and run by the global organization. That's what's really happening today. And most folk at the bottom haven't a clue because they're caught up in the day-to-day problems that they encounter with deindustrialization. Jobs all being given to China, for instance, as they have been for the last 25 or 30 years almost, all through a treaties drawn up again by the CFR, Royal Institute of International Affairs, and they created the World Trade Organization as well, privately run. They decided to give China all the business and deindustrialize the Western countries. And, of course, now they're dealing with all the problems of unemployment, etc., etc., etc. So everything's completely interrelated to do with these private organizations. The governments never listen to the general public. They never listen to the public. When they don't get what they want, they go back for the vote on whatever it happens to be, whether it's to join the European Union. And some countries did it 5 times in a row. And just using marketing skills, they find out who's not voting, why they're not voting, how can they sway them to vote, etc., etc. The fear factor, you'll be left behind, all of this stuff. And they're using the same techniques, of course, with the NAFTA agreement, because America's eventually to become the same as the EU, with a central parliamentary system. During the free trade negotiations before NAFTA even came along, that was a precursor where everything was set up, was on the free trade negotiations. They actually discussed, the US government and Canada and Mexico discussed setting up a parliament for the Americas in Montreal, of all places, but that's where they decided to put it if they build one. So they're still working on this, and integration is still going ahead. Now, right now, and at this moment, of course, we're all waiting for the list of countries to be taken out from the 90s is still ongoing, to be continued. And these boys never change their plans. They never do. When the big foundations publish their agendas and what they want to happen, you can take it to the bank. It's the only bank that really works, because they never ever change their agendas. Now, tonight, I'll put up a couple of links to do, and all the articles I'll mention, mind you, I'll put up tonight at cuttingthroughthematrix.com after the broadcast. But it was back in 2007, for instance, that General Wesley Clark was at the Commonwealth Club of California, and I'll put the link up for that too, and I'll put also a little video clip up with it as well, where he discusses this. He said that there was a policy group, the Project for a New American Century. He said that they're going to destroy the governments of 7 countries within 5 years of each other. It says there actually has been more than 7 countries where the military coups have failed, and then there have been military interventions. So, in other words, they bring in first what we call colour revolutions, where they put in students from all over the world to go and protest within countries that want to take down or foment revolution. If that doesn't work, then they get their armed mercenaries in afterwards, like it's happening in Syria right now. So he discusses all of this on the videos. You can listen to him. And there's 2 videos of him talking about it. I'll put them both up tonight for those who want to see it. But America really is the big stick in the world, as we know, because after the Cold War, supposedly, it'll be the only country left with the kind of power to finish off the global agenda. We'll touch on that when we come back from this break. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix. And I talk about the US, its power basically is a big military power for the world, and it will go down the hill that way too, because if you go back into the other globalists from even back 1930s, for instance, who taught at Oxford University, you'll find that some of them wrote lots of books about the world order and the global society they're going to bring in. And they talked about the US taking over from Britain as the big stick on the world, military-wise, that is too. It's pretty well happened, and you'll find that they actually talked about the US eventually failing, and how they would get pushed back at one or 2 points and then rally forth again. That's the standard what happens in empires, and they seem to be winning again, but in actual, the first time they start to lose anything at all, it's really a sign of the way out. It might take another 50 years for that to happen, but of course that's a big plan too, as we go into a global society. By that time the US will have forced the world into it, or those who run the US or control the US. But here's from the Jerusalem Post right now to do with the Syria and so on. But it says the AIPAC-backed letter by Senators Ben Cardin from Maryland and Susan Collins from Maine begins by labeling Palestinian unilateral efforts at the United Nations unacceptable. So Palestine, as you know, is getting no recognition from anybody, but they managed to get a little foot in the door when they lobbied at the United Nations themselves. And most people don't really care about the Palestinians because they're kept out of the news as much as possible. But AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It's the most powerful lobbying group, according to Wikipedia, in the country. And Britain's got one too, their own form of it. So have other countries as well. Very powerful. But it says here that this letter by Cardin and Susan Collins was actually backed by AIPAC itself, you see, so they're spokespeople for them. And there's a dilemma that the US has, because within the US you have the powerful lobby group that's there for another country, not for the US. So whose interests really are being served here when another country is being used to go to war to finish off strategies that's going to basically benefit a different country altogether? Anyway, it says the letter garnered more than 60 signatures according to AIPAC. The other letter, which was more than 200 Giant Street supporters from around the country, lobbied during visits to Capitol Hill Tuesday, and opens by calling on Obama to reiterate his commitment to both Israel's security and a two-state solution during his 2-day visit, which begins Wednesday. So it's essential for you to reaffirm on your upcoming trip that finding a pathway to peace remains a priority for your administration, but at the same time that they're all wanting them to go to war with Syria on their behalf. I'll put this up tonight for those who want to read it themselves. And also, as I've said already, that's one article on AIPAC. Another one says AIPAC says they support the US strike on Syria. So influential US pro-Israel groups remain quiet on the topic to avoid being seen as rooting for the United States to go to war. And this is from, again, Jerusalem Post, and it says, 3 influential pro-Israel groups urged US lawmakers Tuesday to authorize President Obama to launch an attack on Syria, signaling a stepped-up lobbying effort for American military action. The statements made by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the Anti-Defamation League, and the Republican Jewish Coalition represented the group's most public show of support for US military action since the August 21st attack near Damascus, in which Syria's government is accused of using chemical weapons to kill more than 1,400 people. During the past 2 weeks, the groups have been unusually quiet as the Obama administration sought to build a case for limited strikes against Syrian President Bashar Assad's government. Supporters of the groups and government sources acknowledged that the groups had made it known that they supported US action, but the sources say the groups generally want the debate to focus on US national security rather than how a decision to attack Syria might help Israel. In other words, they want the US to take all the blame for their benefit, really. And I'll put this up today as well. So it isn't straightforward, as you well know. Nothing really is. And you have, within the US, a big, powerful military industrial complex, but you also have people from other countries, or who see another country as their own, and not the US so much, and they're using that too for their own interests. Also, this article too is from the Times of Israel. As Congress begins the debate in the US military involvement in Syria, Israel's ambassador to Washington, Michael Oren, released Israel's first official position statement on the subject Tuesday night. At a subsequent event, he dismissed those critics who argue that the U.S. should not retaliate for the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons because it would put Israel in danger. Shortly after the Senate Foreign Relations Committee concluded a lengthy session debating the approval of a retaliatory strike, Oren released an official statement which he said that Israel agrees with President Obama that the use of chemical weapons is a heinous act. Well, they all do that when they're not using themselves, for which the Assad regime must be held accountable and for which there must be international consequences. Israel further agrees with the president that the use of chemical weapons promotes the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. We have heard that before, and encourages governments who would choose to build nuclear arms, they're meaning Iran, because they want Iran to be taken out too. And then New York Times airbrushes details of the hawkish Israeli stance on Syria after AIPAC pressure. That's from the International Business Times. This is a powerful Israel lobby group in Washington accused of encouraging self-censorship of Syria reprisal report. It says New York Times has come under fire for self-censoring its own reporting on the Syria crisis after pressure from Israel's powerful lobbying group, a committee, that's AIPAC again. That's a powerful group. It can literally run your propaganda in your own country. It says the newspaper ran a news story on the 2nd of September outlining President Obama's efforts to secure congressional backing for military interventions in Syria and position on the possibility of unlimited airstrikes. The report detailed the president's meeting with influential senators and members of Congress and with committees including the Senate Armed Forces Committee and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence before moving on to AIPAC and its agenda. It quoted one unidentified administration official who described AIPAC as the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Don't you think the people themselves, everybody should get a vote if you're going to be involved in a war? But you don't, do you? But when you have these powerful lobby groups, they can make or break any senator or congressman. What can you do about that? There's a conflict here. And also, this article too it says it's from Pravda. In fact, it says Syria, the case against Assad. And it says apparent desperation of those who support the Syrian opposition, in quotation marks, insinuating that the Syrian government used chemical weapons without a shred of evidence, using photographs to prove the case, taken in Iraq 2003, using dodgy proof from the King of Spin. The BBC spells out a sorry story similar to those of Libya and Iraq. And it's true enough, they're all this much the same, aren't they? And it's not a bad article too. It goes through some of the history of this that everybody's forgetting about too, because you're always caught up in the now, and that's what the media tries to do. They don't want you to think back and put things together. So it's not a bad article at all. I'll put that up tonight as well. And also from Pravda, it says the price of dignity. This is part 2, the destruction of Libya. It's quite a good article, in fact. It goes through the history of Libya and the Western interference it's had since it was created, basically. All after oil and the minerals and all the rest of it they had there too. Not just one country, but many countries have been trying that afterwards. But it's a good history which is kind of omitted in the present times that we live in. And also from Wikipedia too, it talks about the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And it's good, it's not too bad actually for Wikipedia, but it talks about, it's a lobbying group that advocates pro-Israel policies to the Congress and executive branch of the US. Is that anywhere in the Constitution at all, folks? The current president of AIPAC is Michael Casson from Westport, Connecticut. It describes itself as America's pro-Israel lobby. The AIPAC is a mass membership American organization whose members include Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. The New York Times has called it the most important organization affecting Americans' relationship with Israel. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about AIPAC and its influence on American policy. And from Wikipedia it says that it's a mass membership American organization whose members include Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. New York Times called it the most important organization affecting America's relationship with Israel. And it's been described as one of the most powerful lobbying groups in Washington, D.C. Its critics have stated it acts as an agent of the Israeli government with a stranglehold on the U.S. Congress with its power and influence. And then it goes on to talk about It says in 2005, a Pentagon analyst pleaded guilty to charges of passing U.S. government secrets to two AIPAC staffers in what's known as the AIPAC espionage scandal. Both staffers were later fired by AIPAC. Then in 2009, all charges against the former AIPAC employees were dropped. They actually do that many times. They're even still doing it for, I think, Pollard, who's still in prison in the US for passing secrets to Israel. But they just keep lobbying to get them off the hook, and they have a lot of power to get it done too. And it's a good history it gives you too on Wikipedia, and just tells you how old the actual committee was and so on. But it goes into its aims and activities, and how they actually can make or break, as I say, congressmen, because everyone's dependent on donations. And it says here, the Washington Post states that AIPAC's website, which details how members of Congress voted on AIPAC's key issues, and the AIPAC Insider, a glossy periodical that handicaps close political races, are scrutinized by thousands of potential donors. Pro-Israel interests have contributed $56.8 million in individuals, groups and soft money donations to the federal candidates and party committees since 1990, according to the Nonpartisan Center for Responsive Politics. Between 2000 and 2004 elections, the 50 members of AIPAC's board donated an average of $72,000 each to campaigns and political action committees. So they can really make and break that, and actually says, or Democrats or Republicans who are running for Congress, and it mentions that in this article as well. So there's definitely a conflict within the US. I think the world's aware of it too, and definitely this is all going along with these wars with Israel's policies as well, because they had the same articles of countries to be taken out when George Bush Jr. was tallied with the PNAC group then as well. Also, the article tonight, I'll put up tonight too, is called The Syrian War That You're Not Being Told. As I said before, that's a YouTube one, and you can hear how old this agenda is. Also, from Global Research in Canada, it says Greater Israel, the Zionist Plan for the Middle East. And it's by Michael Chusodowski. And it says it's called the infamous Oded Yinon Plan. And this is what they call it. This is a following document pertaining to the formation of Greater Israel constitutes the cornerstone of powerful Zionist factions within the current Netanyahu government, the Likud party, as well as within the Israeli military and intelligence establishment. According to the founding father of Zionism, who was Theodor Herzl, the area of the Jewish state stretches from the Brook of Egypt to the Euphrates. According to Rabbi Fixman, the Promised Land extends from the river of Egypt up to the Euphrates, includes parts of Syria and Lebanon as well. And that has been mentioned that by different leaders of Israel over the years. So that's another thing to keep in mind with all these wars that are going on. Now, it says, Russian children now, as America exports some strange philosophy across the world, because it's now called progressive, and it says Russian children are to get same-gender love books from the West. Representatives from the LGBT community like to point out that remarkably creative people are abundant in their community. This is a correct statement considering the level of creativity with which the idea of homosexuality is promoted and propagated amongst children in the Russian hinterland by some publishers, as evidenced by a scandalous story that recently took place in Vladimir. Another book scandal erupted in Vladimir, Russia. Local ombudsman for children, Gennady Pokarchev, came across a children's literature of a very specific nature in a local bookstore. Formerly, the books were one of the many encyclopedias, that's what they call them, on the burning topic of sex and where children come from. If you go through the history, by the way, of the printing press and the various revolutions throughout Europe, they all had lots of ties to today, in fact. You can find that the same kind of characters were putting out the same kind of books back then to try to destroy the cultures across Europe in order to change it. And some of them called themselves the encyclopedists, the group that they formed at the time, to change the cultures of the actual people who would oppose them. Also, as we go through this nonsense of war, which also covers a lot of things that are happening domestically and to other countries across the world, because it hides a lot of things that are going on right now. But it says Israel has a missile test amid the fear of Syria escalation. Israel carried out a joint missile test with the US and the Med amid heightened tension over possible Western military strikes in Syria. It came as the US Congress prepared for its first public hearing on a possible military response to alleged chemical weapons in Syria. Earlier, the UN confirmed that more than 2 million Syrians were now refugees from the 30-month conflict. More Syrians were now displaced than in any other nationality, it said. And a senior Israeli defense official confirmed to the BBC that a missile had been fired Tuesday to test its defense systems. It says, too, it was fired towards the direction of Syria, in fact, as well. You couldn't really get the saber rattling going as much as is going on right now by the ones who want it all to happen. Right? And as things are going on across the world, too, don't forget that you're involved. And this is the whole thing, too, as governments trying to... In fact, I don't like the name the governments use when they want to go to war. It's like Britain has decided, or the US has decided, and so on and so on. No one's ever asked their opinion on anything. The vast majority. That's why they call them the silent majority. You have no say in anything. And in fact, you're kept out of the say as much as possible. You're trained that way not to participate in having any power at all. Leave it to the experts. Leave it to all the specialists above you. They come out of special wombs. And so on. And you just play yourselves. That's what you're told to do. That's why you get so much entertainment. But we've touched on this particular character many times before because of his shady past. But it says, Obama science diplomat advocates population control. And you can guess who it is, of course. But it says, the Obama administration has been engaging in science diplomacy, it's called. Very Orwellian again, eh? Science. It's all called science today. Remember that global society wants experts to rule us all. And various government agencies to decide everything about us, even if you can breed in the future or not. I'm not kidding about that. But if by sending out his top science advisor to visit foreign dignitaries, so exporting, again, it's not just porn and so on, they're exporting from the US, it's also this. It says, but Jon Holdren again, director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and Obama official engaged in this jet setting, has expressed controversial views about government-imposed population controls. The Guardian reports that Holdren regularly meets with top scientists from other countries such as Brazil, Russia, China and Japan as a new way to go, to reach out to bridge cultural and economic gaps between the US and the rest of the world. Holdren has previously stated that the United States and the rest of the world have too many people. What they really mean is the wrong people, actually, folks. They don't need us all anymore, you see, because they've set up most of the manufacturing for everything in China, for instance. And they don't need the old people anymore, the old style human, because there's no work for most of them. And there's even less work in the future. You know that too. Anyways, went on about the population bomb, and so on and so on. Holdren has a record not only surpassed by his lifetime collaborator Paul Ehrlich for spreading misinformation and making failed predictions. Myron Abel, Director of International Energy and Global Warming Policy at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, told the Daily Caller News Foundation. In addition, Dr. Holdren has advocated a wide array of despicable policies such as mandatory population control and was a willing stooge of the Soviet Union as a member for several decades of the Pugwash Conference, and of which he was chairman when it was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995. Ebel added, Jon Holdren is therefore the perfect science diplomat for an administration that peddles junk science and supports policies that will make poor people, and especially poor people in poor countries, poorer. As President Obama's science diplomat, he can now advocate for global impoverishment on a global stage. Testifying before the Senate in 1974, Holdren and fellow scientist and population control advocate Paul Ehrlich argued that the world was moving towards a no-growth economy because of overpopulation, and technology would not be able to mitigate the problem. He said, we're going to move to a no-growth economy, Ehrlich said. So everything's planned way ahead, folks. It's all planned way, way ahead, long before Ehrlich came along too. It says, now whether we do it intelligently through the government by planning as rapidly as possible, or whether we move there automatically. By the way, when I look at some of the figures these days, I think we're moving there much more rapidly than people realize. We're going to get there, obviously, he said. That's why his only problem is, when's the government going to take all responsibility for everything that we do? Everything we do, individually. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about Mr. Holdren and Paul Ehrlich and how it's still going on today. It's a very old agenda, as I say, because 100 years ago, the big boys, the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the Royal Society were talking about the same agenda then, what we'll do after the Industrial Revolution starts to slow down and so on. And after we've got all these wars through and we've got the global society, etc., how do we train the public? What do we do with them then? We bring down the populations and create institutional changes, these kind of things. Now it says here that one such collaboration between Ehrlich and Holdren was an essay entitled Population and Panaceas, a technological perspective from 1969 that argued man's present technology is inadequate to the task of maintaining the world's burgeoning billions, even under the most optimistic assumptions. Now, the fact is, in most first world countries, the populations have been plummeting. Even the United Nations admits that. And the countries are going along with a policy of mass immigration, not only keep the populations up, but also to bring in a global society. In fact, these wars, by the way, are part of it. Where do you think all these refugees end up going? That's a big part of it, folks. Destroy the existing cultures for a global society. It's all been discussed. And it says Holdren and Ehrlich further argue that technological advancements to increase food supplies would be fruitless until the population growth rate drastically is reduced. No effort to expand the carrying capacity of the earth can keep pace with unbridled population growth, he wrote. That was back then. Holdren was heavily criticized after being tapped by President Obama in 2009 for being an author in a textbook that floated such ideas as forced abortions, putting sterilants in the drinking water, and government-mandated family planning. That's forced abortion and so on, and sterilization. This was in the US government, folks. The ones that are bringing progressiveness to the world. And everything else along with it. So one passage of the textbook even argued that such coercive population control methods could even be constitutional. It says, indeed, it has been concluded that compulsory population control laws, even including laws requiring compulsory abortion, could be sustained under the existing constitution if the population crisis becomes sufficiently severe to endanger the society, Holdren and Ehrlich wrote. Few today consider the situations in the US serious enough to justify compulsion, however, it says. This debate's still up there as the science are, isn't it? Holdren's office denied the doctor-supported course of abortions to controlling the population. It does that right now. But this is all documented in the books that they put out. Dr. Holdren has stated flatly that he does not now support and has never supported compulsory abortions. Well, he's a good liar. That's why he's in government. Because it was in his books. And anyway, this is what they put out for you. And these are the guys who are supposedly running the countries. Remember, you don't have countries anymore. That's what Jon Rappoport said, the guy who was appointed as the head of the EU Parliament. He says the nation state is obsolete. I read the article on the air at the time. Go into the archive section at cuttingthroughthematrix.com and read it for yourself. See, people they always think, as I say, when you get pushed to go to wars and so on, that you're still a nation. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're run by a small clique, a minority of people. And the whole world's like that now, with an internationalist agenda. It's been like that for 100 years. And so you don't have what you think is your own country with its own customs and so on. That's why they're always changing. You're progressive. You're going through the agenda, folks. And as all this is happening too, and it says, a pandemic of pension woes is plaguing the nation. Across the nation, cities and states are watching Detroit's largest ever municipal bankruptcy filing with great trepidation. Use of underfunded retirement promises to public sector workers. That's what you get in a big socialist society, is so many folk working for governments and right down to the bottom, which helped Detroit law could plunge them into a similar and terrifying financial hole. The CNBC.com analysis of more than 120 of the nation's largest state and local pension plans finds they face a wide range of burdens as their aging workforces near retirement. See, they've never had old folks before. You understand that how things are written, people? The population boom, they never had people born before until the 1950s, apparently. And my goodness, we're going to get old one day. Folk apparently never got old before that. A lot of them didn't actually. They were starved to death or forced to work 16 hours a day, sort of thing. Anyway, it says, thanks to a patchwork of accounting practices and rosy investment assumptions, it's not even clear just how big a financial hole many states and cities have dug for themselves. That may soon change thanks to the new set of government accounting standards that could serve as a nasty wake-up call to states and cities relying on rosy scenarios and head-in-the-sand accounting. What it boils down to is not just in the US. It's the same. Understand we're global. Every country is doing what every other country is doing, because all get orders from the same internationalists. It's been that way for a long, long time. And they're going to plunder the pensions, and they're going to, actually they've been spending them all along anyway, and they're going to bring us all down into austerity. That's part of the big plan. Austerity, you understand, where every penny you have will go to basic survival for food, water, all owned by private internationalists. And it'll go for your energy as well, to the energy corporations. That's where your money's to go, all your extra spending money. There'll be no more extra spending money. And also the major pharmaceutical company wants to block access to clinical trial of data of their drugs because they fear profit loss. That's quite an article, actually. But it talks about AbbVie, it's called, split off from Abbott Laboratories, maker of Humira, and Intermune, maker of Esperate, have filed a lawsuit against the European Medicines Agency, is equivalent to the FDA for Europe, to block access to clinical trial data on the benefits and harms of their drugs, claiming that these vital facts are trade secrets, whose release would harm their profits. It would also harm the people that take them, according to this article. Medical researchers have been denied access to clinical trial information. But then they go into this, it says, of course, when a drug causes cancer, release of clinical data information could potentially harm the profits of the company that makes Humira, a drug that's quickly becoming one of the best-selling drugs in the world, mainly because of the marketing techniques used by AbbVie, and it causes cancer. Here, and it gives you one of their ads to watch if you want to watch it. But it says, the FDA warning label on Humira warns of increased risk of lymphoma and other malignancies, including a rare type of cancer called hepatosplenic T-cell lymphoma that often results in death, along with increased risk of serious infections leading to hospitalization or death, including tuberculosis. It opens you up to tuberculosis infection, bacterial sepsis, invasive fungal infections such as histoplasmosis, and infections due to other opportunistic pathogens. Since the FDA is pretty slow on the uptake of actually putting adverse effects of drugs on their warning labels, this author says, I'll mention that in addition to lymphoma, TB, and other infections, Humira is also linked to the following: leukemia, skin cancers, candidiasis, Kaposi sarcoma, histoplasmosis, cryptosporidium, and says all of which can lead to death. No wonder AbbVie wants to hide their data from their clinical trials. No kidding, eh? And it's true enough, marketing can sell you anything, folks. It can sell you anything, and of course, accept the side effects. And you're supposed to just simply overlook that, one in so many will get something nasty happening. Perhaps that's what your doctor is told, because the American Medical Association was all set up by the Rockefellers, remember, including what the doctors will be taught. And that's still the same today. Also, I mentioned this before, Natural Capital Declaration announces new signatories and supporters as implementation begins. And I read the article the other day on the air to do with Agenda 21 and how everything's been privatized, etc., to save the world and save the earth, etc. But now the big Rothschild boys decided up the green banks. For those who don't know about it, look into green banks. Is Rothschild who put it forward, and all the little banks that you see are actually subsidiaries of his own bank, and they're putting it natural capital. And it says that the Natural Capital Declaration has announced 2 signatories and 3 new supporters: FMO, First Green Bank, TEEB for Business Coalition, True Cost, and Association for Sustainable and Responsible Investments. It's a finance-led initiative committing banks, investors, and insurers to integrate natural capital considerations in financial products and services, and launched at the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, the Rio Plus 20, in June 2012. Earlier this week, the NCD announced the start of a new roadmap phase, which aims to turn these commitments into reality through a program of work by 4 working groups, each led by a bank. The same boys that run and own and set up the Royal Institute for International Affairs, folks. It's quite something. See, they own the air itself. And you're going to pay for every little bit of pollution, including your CO2 and so on, as they make trillions of bucks off you in the process. To save the earth, of course. What a great con that one is. From Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night to me. Your God or your gods go with you.